Okay, I have lots of resources on pruning. We're going to talk about watering. Remember I told you about that resource, the woo calls, and it has all the different water requirements of plants. So you probably can't read this. It has a botanical name and it has a region. We are region 1. So what this shows is butterfly bush. Buddleia davidi is a low water plant. Here's English boxwood, Buxus sempervirens. It's a medium water. So you'll see the name of the plant and then what the water requirements are. So really easy to use to hydrozone. And it has pretty much all the species, almost all landscape species, drought tolerant and otherwise, that you would see in California. I'm going to skip that. We know the components of drip, valves with filters and pressure regulators. I already talked about online drip, where you're punching in the emitters, versus inline emitters, where they're inside, and the end caps and flush valves I talked about. Drip used to be an emitter per plant. We're really moving away from that to watering the whole area with inline emitters. So this becomes more like rainfall, or more like a spray system, where you're watering the whole area. You're watering the soil instead of watering the plant, okay? But you have to hydrozone in order to do this. Your plant, all the plants in a zone have to be the same water requirements. You can even do subsurface drip. If you're mowing an area, like you have lawn or you have a meadow that you're going to mow, you can put the drip in, but put it a little bit below grade, okay? A lot of times people ask me, how long should I water with drip irrigation? That really depends on a lot of things. It depends on the spacing of the emitters inside the line. The emitters also have different gallonages. They produce different flow. Some are 1/4 gallon per hour, some are 1/2 gallon per hour, some are 1 gallon per hour. So there's a lot of details that you have to know. If you're putting in an irrigation system, well, that's easy. You know what the requirements are, or you know what you've put in. So I like you to think about supply and demand when you're watering, or needs and supply. So I already talked about low water, drought tolerant plants typically need 1/4 inch of water per week. Or you could do 1/2 inch every other week. A lot of plants, once they're established, that would be perfectly fine for them, okay? So we know we need 1/2 inch, I'm going to say every other week. So I can do the calculations. So I need, and here's the main conversion. This is all in cubic feet because I have square feet. I convert the 1/2 inch to feet, and then I have square feet of my garden. So I know I need cubic feet of water, but that doesn't mean anything to me, so I change that to gallons. So 7.48 gallons per cubic feet. So I know I need 0.31 gallons per square foot every other week. Whew, that's a lot of math for late in the day. Okay. So that's how much my garden needs. Now, how much am I going to supply it? Again, if I know the irrigation system and I'm putting it in, I can, for clay soil, our emitters are spaced every 18 inches apart, and the lines are spaced every 18 inches apart. Okay? So I need 0.3 gallons every other week. I know my emitters are 0.6 gallons per hour. I can do the conversion. So I need about 70 minutes every other week. Okay? It's a lot of math. You'll get the slides. You can look at that. An easier way to do this is, and if you already have a system in place, is you can use your water meter to figure out how much you need to supply to a zone. So what you do is you go out to your, turn on a zone, go out to your water meter, and you actually measure. Remember that little arrow that I talked about? That little arrow going around one time is 1 cubic foot of water. So you can measure how much each zone is providing to your plants. Am I losing you guys on this? Shake some heads. I'm losing you or I'm not losing you? You're getting it? You're getting it. Okay, great. So this is the foolproof way. If you actually measure on site how much water each zone is, then it's very easy to schedule what your plants need. Okay? There's the math. Do I need to go through it? In this case, I kept it to cubic feet because your water meter is in cubic feet. So you don't need to do the conversion to gallons. It's kind of a waste. So in this case, I said, same example, 0.0416 cubic feet of water per square feet. Turn on a zone, wait for 5 minutes, go to your water meter, time how long it takes to go 1 rotation of the needle. Let's say it takes 2 minutes for 1 cubic feet. Calculate the number of minutes. I need this much. It takes 2 minutes per cubic feet. My area is this much. It's going to take 43 minutes every other week. Okay? Do the math. This is one case where we really need to kind of do some math. Okay? All right, watering. Newly planted plants are a little bit of a, they need some special requirements. These plants have been watered once a day probably at the nursery, okay? You're not going to give them water once a day. We need to wean them off. They have been fertilized quite a bit. You're not going to need to fertilize this. They want them to grow as fast as possible. They don't really require a lot of fertilizer in your garden. So we need to wean them off of those nursery settings, right? The other thing that I want to tell you is that, especially with drought-tolerant plants, it gets a little tricky because the soil in the can is very fast draining. They want to water every day. They want fast draining soil. When you put this plant into your clay soil, clay has a tendency to grab the water and hold on to it. So you're irrigating, you're checking your clay soil, and it's very wet, but sometimes the soil in this plant, in this potting medium, is dry, okay? So when plants are newly planted, I want the soil to be kind of wet. I don't want it bone dry. I want you to, if you're planting in bone dry soil, you're going to plant a hole, you're going to fill it with water, you're going to let it drain out, and then you're going to plant. So the soil is kind of moist. And then you're going to hand water it in really well. But if you find that a plant is not doing well, and you just installed it, here's the thing to do. Check the soil around the plant, make sure it's wet, and then check the moisture meter in the soil that your plant was purchased in, okay? If the soil in the can is really dry, you need to hand water that plant in order to get it wet. Is this making sense? Because a lot of times, some plants, it just takes them a while to get their roots into the soil, the clay soil, and until they do, they're just not going to really thrive. Okay, so this has been a problem I've seen in a lot of installations. Okay, does that make sense? And if you have the drip line, and you have some plants that, you just have to hand water them a lot, they have these little adapters that you can clip onto the drip emitter, and you can add a little 1/4-inch tubing that'll go right to the root ball of the plant to give it a little bit of extra water right at that root ball. You don't need to do that for every plant, just the ones that aren't doing really well. Okay? All right. Okay. Test the surrounding soil, test the soil the plant was grown in. Wetting the root ball, hand water, you can add that extender that I talked about. And some people actually remove a lot of that fast draining soil from the root ball. That's kind of an extreme example, but it does kind of help, to kind of mix that soil with your clay soil and then do the planting. Okay, If you're concerned on when to water, if you don't want to do the calculations, you can always use your root meter, your moisture meter, to see how wet or dry your soil is. With drought-tolerant plants, I want to see that soil dry out a little bit. I don't want it constantly moist, right? So this particular moisture meter goes from a scale of 1 to 10. So I would want to water when this is about 3. So 1 to 3 is kind of dry, 4 to 7 is moist, and then 8 to 10 is really wet. So just when it's coming out of the moist section and into the dry section, that would be a really good time to water. You don't want the soil to dry out completely. Our soils tend to get a little hydrophobic. They're clay soils. And so it tends to be hard to re-water them, okay? So this is for drought-tolerant plants. If you have medium water plants, you really want to keep the moisture level pretty moderate, like around 5 is when you want to water it again. If you have high water plants, birches, they're going to really want to be pretty moist all the time. The soil's going to be pretty wet. If you have lawn, which has really tiny roots, you're going to need to water 3 times a week usually. 2 or 3 times a week for sure. You don't want them to dry out. All right. Once plants are established, then you can kind of back off on the water. Very low shrubs and trees, really like once a month after they're established is all they really need. Low water, once per month for shrubs and established perennials. Some perennials, you know, they wouldn't mind, I would say every other week for perennials. Their root system's a little bit smaller, so every other week would be really good. Medium, once per week. High water, several times a week. Okay. If we're going to have a heat wave, you know it's going to get to be 90, 100. Try to water 3 to 4 days before the heat wave. Don't water in the middle of the heat wave. That's a great way to make sure that you'll get crown and root rot. Again, remember, you know, we don't want those warm, wet conditions, okay? All right, oh, this came in again. I've tried 3 times to clear this. Sorry about that. I think I'm going to skip favorite tools. This will be on there. I wanted to show you just, this was my house, 1994, lawn, some dead oak here. There's another oak over here. It blew down our first summer. Birch tree, ivy, boxwood hedge, you know, tip what you see around. I call this a wildlife wasteland. There's nothing to eat there. There's no nectar. There's no flowers. It was kind of sad. I did keep the lawn in the sunny part of the yard in the front because lawn does best in full sun. I had 2 daughters at that time. But by 2009, they really weren't using the lawn that much, so I decided to get rid of it. So here they are. This is an area where we were going to have a meadow, where I'm going to have a meadow, so they did take the lawn away. Here is another area I told you about. There's a little bit of a berm where these Cleveland sage, you can just barely see that little bit of a berm, but you see the drip lines, and you see how regular they are there, so that's going to water the whole area. I had my arborist drop some arbor chips after he came, so that's all from my yard, and the newspaper is also all from us. But you can see we're mulching there. Just a close-up on that. And then here's how it looks. It's very full, no weeds anywhere, and lots of things for birds and pollinators to eat and drink. There's the meadow. That's after 3 months, it's really filled in now. I have some more case studies, but we're going to skip those because I want to talk to you about some of the plants and some of the resources that I have. Okay, native plant references. There's a wonderful month-by-month guide by Helen Popper. That would be a really good one. Care and maintenance of Southern California native plant gardens. I think this one's out of print, so that one might be a little hard. That would be a good one if you had a Spanish-speaking gardener It's English on one side and Spanish on the other page, so that's really good. The Native Plant Society has lots and lots of YouTube videos online that you can look for. Googling about how to take care of plants, you can find lots of resources there. That's it. Thank you very much. Don't go away.